At least one child turned out right, my father said with a satisfied smirk, looking directly at my brother David while I stood invisible in the corner of our family living room. Those words would haunt him for the rest of his life, because exactly 47 minutes later, my phone would ring with news that would destroy everything he believed about his two children. My name is Dr. Rebecca Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how the daughter deemed a failure received a Nobel Prize nomination on the same day her father declared her worthless. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who should believe in you most, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you understand what it means to be invisible in your own family, and subscribe, because what happened next proves that sometimes the greatest vindication comes not from revenge, but from excellence they never saw coming. Our household in Newton, Massachusetts operated under one unshakable truth. David was destined for greatness, and I was destined to watch from the sidelines. My father, Dr. James Thompson, had built his cardiothoracic surgery practice on precision and reputation. My mother, Margaret, had been a psychiatric nurse before marriage, and together they had crafted a vision of medical dynasty that required perfect children to execute perfectly. David fulfilled every expectation with clockwork precision. 3 years my senior, he possessed the natural charisma and memorization skills that made medical school at Johns Hopkins seem effortless. Conversations at our dinner table revolved entirely around his rotations, his research opportunities, his networking success with department heads. I existed in these moments as furniture, present but unacknowledged, breathing but irrelevant to the family narrative being constructed around David's inevitable triumph. The defining moment occurred during my junior year of high school. I had spent 8 months developing an independent research project on mitochondrial dysfunction in neurodegenerative diseases, working with a professor at MIT who had noticed my unusual questions during a summer program. When the International Science and Engineering Fair announced that my work had won the top prize in cellular biology, I felt certain this achievement would finally earn my parents' recognition. I walked into our kitchen that evening holding the medal and the letter from the judging committee. My hands trembled as I approached my parents, who were reviewing David's latest grades from medical school. "Mom, Dad," I said quietly, "I won the international competition. The judges said my research shows graduate-level understanding of cellular mechanisms." My mother glanced up briefly, her expression distracted. "That's wonderful, Rebecca. Did you congratulate David? He just received the highest score in his surgery rotation. Dr. Patterson said he's never seen a student with such natural surgical instincts." My father never lifted his eyes from David's transcript. "Surgery requires real intellectual rigor, Rebecca. These science fair projects are interesting hobbies, but they don't translate to practical medical skills. You should focus on volunteering at the hospital if you're serious about following in the family footsteps." The gold medal felt heavy in my hands as I watched them return to discussing David's achievements. My research, work that would later form the foundation of my doctoral dissertation, was dismissed as a hobby. That night, I understood with crystalline clarity that no accomplishment would ever be sufficient to earn their recognition, because they had already decided which child mattered. The pattern continued relentlessly through college and medical school. While David's achievements were celebrated with champagne dinners and extended family phone calls, my acceptance to Harvard Medical School received a brief, "good for you," before conversation returned to David's surgical fellowship prospects. I graduated summa cum laude from my MD program, but the celebration dinner focused on David's recent publication in a prestigious cardiothoracic journal. When I announced my acceptance to a combined MD-PhD program at Massachusetts General Hospital to pursue research in neurodegeneration, my father's response was swift and dismissive. "Research is for people who can't handle real patient care, Rebecca. David's already being courted by the best cardiac surgery programs in the country. That's the kind of impact medicine should have, saving lives directly, not hiding in laboratories with theories." My mother nodded in agreement. "David has always had better people skills anyway. Patients need doctors who can connect with them, not just understand cellular structures." The irony was devastating. My research focused on developing treatments for Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's, work that could potentially save millions of lives. But because it happened in a laboratory rather than an operating room, it held no value in their assessment of medical worth. I threw myself into my research with the intensity of someone trying to prove a fundamental truth about her own existence. During my residency, I split my time between clinical neurology and my laboratory work. 18-hour days became routine as I balanced patient care with research that was beginning to yield remarkable results. I was developing a novel approach to preventing protein aggregation in neurodegenerative diseases, work that showed promise for halting disease progression in early stages. My publications began appearing in top-tier journals, and colleagues started referring to my research as groundbreaking. None of this registered with my parents. At family gatherings, David's surgical cases dominated conversation, while my research remained invisible. When I published a paper in Nature Medicine that was downloaded over 50,000 times in its first month, my parents didn't mention it. When David successfully completed a routine bypass surgery, they called every relative to share the news. The breaking point arrived last month during David's engagement party. The Brookline Country Club was filled with medical elite, department heads, renowned surgeons, hospital administrators who had gathered to celebrate David's engagement to Caroline, daughter of another prominent cardiac surgeon. It was the kind of medical dynasty union my parents had always dreamed of orchestrating. I arrived alone, as always, wearing the black dress I reserved for professional conferences. The contrast was immediately apparent. David and Caroline held court at the center of the room, surrounded by admirers discussing surgical techniques and hospital politics, while I stood at the periphery, unnoticed by most guests who knew me only as David's sister. Dr. Harrison, the chief of cardiac surgery at Massachusetts General, approached my father during cocktail hour. "James, you must be incredibly proud of both your children. I understand Rebecca's work in neurodegeneration is attracting international attention." My father's smile faltered momentarily. "Well, David is our surgeon. Rebecca has always been more interested in academic pursuits." The dismissive tone was unmistakable. Dr. Harrison, who had obviously done his research, pressed further. "But her research on protein aggregation prevention, that could revolutionize treatment for millions of patients worldwide. Quite different from surgical intervention, but potentially even more impactful." My father's discomfort was visible as he deflected the conversation back to David's surgical accomplishments. I watched this exchange from across the room, feeling the familiar ache of invisibility, even when my work was being acknowledged by others in my field. Later that evening, as guests began departing, I overheard the conversation that would change everything. I was collecting my coat from the bedroom when I heard my parents talking in the adjacent room, their voices carrying through the partially open door. "Did you see how Dr. Harrison was trying to make Rebecca sound more important than David?" My mother said, frustration evident in her voice. My father's response was swift and brutal. "Harrison doesn't understand real medicine. David saves lives every day in surgery. Rebecca plays with test tubes and writes papers that nobody except other researchers will ever read." At least one child turned out right. The cruelty of that statement, spoken with such casual certainty, hit me like a physical blow. After years of dismissal, this wasn't just indifference. This was active disdain for everything I had worked to achieve. I stood frozen in that doorway, coat clutched in my hands, as the magnitude of their perception crashed over me. 20 minutes later, I was driving home when my phone rang. Dr. Sarah Chen, the director of the Nobel Prize Committee's Medical Review Board, was calling with news that would transform that moment of profound rejection into the sweetest vindication of my entire life. The phone call from Dr. Chen lasted exactly 14 minutes and 17 seconds. I know because I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, watching the digital clock on my dashboard as she explained that my research on preventing protein aggregation in neurodegenerative diseases had been selected for Nobel Prize consideration. The nomination would be announced publicly within 48 hours, pending final committee approval. "Dr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "your work represents a paradigm shift in how we approach neurodegeneration. The committee has reviewed studies from laboratories around the world attempting to replicate your results. The consistency and potential impact are extraordinary." I sat in stunned silence as she continued describing the nomination process, the media attention that would follow, and the ceremony procedures. When she finished, I asked the only question that mattered to me in that moment. When will this become public knowledge? "The announcement will be made Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. The press release will go out simultaneously to major medical journals and news outlets worldwide." Tuesday. The same day my father had dismissed my life's work as meaningless academic theory. The timing felt orchestrated by some cosmic sense of justice that I had never believed existed until that moment. The weekend between Dr. Chen's call and the announcement became a period of surreal anticipation. I moved through my regular routines, hospital rounds, laboratory work, research meetings, while carrying this monumental secret. Every interaction with colleagues felt different, knowing that in days, everything would change. The work I had been pursuing in relative obscurity was about to receive the highest recognition in medical science. My research had begun 8 years earlier during my residency, when I noticed patterns in neurodegeneration that existing literature couldn't adequately explain. While other researchers focused on treating symptoms after disease progression, I became obsessed with prevention. The breakthrough came 2 years ago when I identified a specific intervention that could halt protein misfolding before aggregation began. The implications were staggering. If my approach proved scalable, Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's could be prevented rather than managed. The preliminary trials showed efficacy rates that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Patients who received the treatment in early stages showed no progression over 18-month observation periods. But developing this research had required sacrifices that my family never acknowledged. While David was building his surgical reputation through high-profile cases, I was spending 70-hour weeks in the laboratory, testing hypotheses that failed more often than they succeeded. Grant applications, peer review processes, and experimental protocols consumed years of my life, while David's surgical successes provided immediate gratification and recognition. The professional validation had come gradually from the international research community. Conferences began inviting me as a keynote speaker. Other laboratories started requesting collaboration. The Journal of Neuroscience featured my work on their cover with an editorial calling it the most promising development in neurodegeneration research in decades. None of this penetrated my parents' perception of valuable medical work. Surgery remained their gold standard for impact, and research remained theoretical indulgence. The gap between my professional recognition and family acknowledgement had widened to an unbridgeable chasm. Monday evening, I received confirmation from Dr. Chen. The nomination was official, and the announcement would proceed as scheduled. The press release had been finalized, including a detailed explanation of my research methods and potential applications. Several news outlets had already prepared feature stories about my work and its implications for millions of patients worldwide. I spent Monday night reviewing my research notes, preparing for the media attention that would follow the announcement. The irony wasn't lost on me that the work my father had dismissed as irrelevant academic theory would soon be international news. The daughter he considered a disappointment was about to receive recognition that would overshadow every surgical case David had ever completed. Tuesday morning arrived with devastating clarity. I was scheduled to attend a family breakfast at my parents' house, a monthly tradition that usually centered around David's latest accomplishments. The timing was perfect. The Nobel announcement would occur exactly at 11 a.m., just as these gatherings typically concluded. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a conservative blue dress that projected professional competence without drawing attention. This would be the last family gathering where I attended as the invisible daughter, the overlooked child whose achievements didn't register in their assessment of success. As I drove to my parents' house, I realized that everything was about to change irreversibly. The family dynamic that had defined 34 years of my life would be shattered by a single phone call. The daughter they had dismissed was about to become internationally recognized for work that could change medicine forever. The breakfast table was set with my mother's fine china, a ritual reserved for family gatherings she considered significant. David sat in his usual position of prominence, regaling our parents with details from his latest surgical case, a complex valve replacement that had required innovative techniques. Caroline, his fiancée, listened with the practiced admiration of someone accustomed to being the surgeon's wife. The patient was high risk, David explained, cutting his eggs with surgical precision. Most surgeons would have recommended conservative management, but I knew we could achieve better outcomes with direct intervention. My father leaned forward with interest. That's exactly the kind of thinking that separates good surgeons from great ones, taking calculated risks when conservative approaches are insufficient. I sat quietly, as always, eating breakfast while they discussed David's professional triumphs. The familiar pattern felt surreal given what I knew was coming. In less than 90 minutes, my phone would ring with news that would fundamentally alter every assumption they held about their two children. My mother refilled coffee cups while sharing gossip from the hospital auxiliary meetings. Dr. Patterson mentioned that David's reputation is spreading beyond Massachusetts General. Apparently, programs at Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic have been asking about his availability for fellowship positions. Caroline smiled proudly. David has always been exceptional at everything he attempts. It's one of the qualities that first attracted me to him. The conversation continued in this vein for 45 minutes. David's surgical skills, his professional prospects, his growing reputation among cardiac surgery elite. I contributed occasional polite responses when directly addressed, but mostly observed the family dynamic that had shaped my entire life. At 10:30 a.m., my father's attention turned to me with the casual interest one might show a distant acquaintance. "Rebecca, how is your research progressing? Still working on those protein studies?" The question was asked with the tone reserved for humoring someone's hobby, rather than discussing serious professional work. "Yes," I replied simply. "The results have been encouraging." David looked up from his newspaper. "Dad, you should see the laboratory Rebecca works in. All these machines and computers running tests that take months to complete. I don't know how she has the patience for such slow-moving work." My father chuckled. "Surgery requires immediate decision-making under pressure. Research allows for endless deliberation and revision, different temperaments suited to different approaches." The implicit hierarchy was clear. Surgery required superior intellectual and emotional capabilities, while research was for those who couldn't handle real medical challenges. This assessment, delivered with casual certainty, represented everything I had been fighting against my entire professional life. At 10:45 a.m., the conversation turned to upcoming social events. Caroline's parents were hosting a dinner for the surgical department, and David had been invited to present a case study at the Regional Cardiac Surgery Conference. These acknowledgments of David's growing prominence were discussed with the pride parents reserve for their most successful child. "It's remarkable how quickly David has established himself," my mother observed. "Dr. Harrison was telling me that residents usually take years to gain the kind of recognition David has achieved in months." My father nodded approvingly. "Natural talent combined with proper work ethic. That's what distinguishes exceptional physicians from competent ones." I checked my phone discreetly. 10:52 a.m. In 8 minutes, everything they believed about natural talent and exceptional physicians was about to be challenged in ways they couldn't anticipate. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. As they celebrated David's regional recognition, I was minutes away from receiving international acknowledgement for work that could impact millions of lives. The contrast between their perception and reality was about to become dramatically, irreversibly apparent. Caroline excused herself to make a phone call about wedding arrangements, leaving me alone with my parents and David. The conversation naturally returned to David's surgical accomplishments and future prospects. They discussed his career trajectory with the detailed planning typically reserved for military campaigns or corporate acquisitions. Within 5 years, my father predicted, David will be leading his own surgical program. The combination of technical skill and leadership ability is rare in young surgeons. David accepted this praise with practiced modesty, while my mother beamed with maternal pride. I sat watching this familiar performance, knowing it was occurring for the last time. After 11 a.m., the family dynamics that had governed our relationships for decades would no longer be sustainable. At 10:58 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Chen. "Announcement proceeding as scheduled. Congratulations again, Dr. Thompson." I placed the phone face down on the table and looked around at my family. David was describing his surgical technique for valve replacement. My father was offering professional guidance, and my mother was planning celebration dinners for David's achievements. None of them suspected that in 90 seconds, the daughter they had dismissed as academically inclined but practically irrelevant was about to receive recognition that would overshadow every accomplishment they had ever celebrated. At exactly 11:00 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Sarah Chen, Nobel Committee. I looked up to find 3 pairs of eyes watching me with mild annoyance that someone would interrupt our family breakfast with a phone call. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to take this." My father frowned. "Rebecca, we're in the middle of a family discussion. Can't your research calls wait until after breakfast?" "This won't take long," I replied, answering the phone with perfect composure. "Dr. Thompson speaking." Dr. Chen's voice was formal and clear enough to carry across the silent breakfast table. Dr. Thompson, I'm calling to inform you that the Nobel Prize Committee has officially announced your nomination for this year's Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The press release is being distributed worldwide as we speak. The words hung in the air like a detonation. I watched my family's expressions shift from mild annoyance to confusion to disbelief. My father's coffee cup remained suspended halfway to his lips. David's newspaper crumpled in his suddenly tightened grip. My mother's face had gone completely pale. Thank you, Dr. Chen, I said calmly. I'm honored by the committee's recognition. The citation specifically mentions your groundbreaking work on preventing protein aggregation in neurodegenerative diseases. The committee notes that your research represents the most significant advancement in neurodegeneration prevention in medical history. I maintained my professional composure while watching my family's world realign around this impossible information. I appreciate the committee's confidence in the research applications. Dr. Thompson, you should know that the media response has been extraordinary. Every major news outlet is requesting interviews. The New York Times Science Desk wants to feature your work on tomorrow's front page. The implications of your research for millions of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's patients have captured international attention. I understand, I replied simply. I'll coordinate with your communications team for appropriate media engagement. After ending the call, I placed my phone back on the table and looked around at my family. The silence was profound. David stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. My mother's eyes had filled with tears of shock and something that might have been regret. My father's face had drained of color entirely. Rebecca, my mother whispered, did that woman just say Nobel Prize? Yes, I replied with the same calm tone I might use to discuss weather. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, for my research on preventing neurodegeneration. My father found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a croak. But that's the highest honor in medicine. Yes, it is, I agreed. David, still processing this impossible reversal of everything he had believed about our relative accomplishments, managed to ask, how long have you known? The committee contacted me 4 days ago. The nomination became official yesterday. The implications were sinking in rapidly. 4 days ago, before our conversation about David being the child who turned out right, while they were dismissing my research as irrelevant academic theory, I was being recognized for what the Nobel Committee called the most significant advancement in neurodegeneration prevention in medical history. My father's face had progressed from pale to ashen. Rebecca, we had no idea your research was so important, I suggested helpfully. Impactful? Worthy of recognition? Caroline returned from her phone call to find the breakfast table transformed into a tableau of shock and confusion. Is everything all right? She asked, looking around at our faces. Rebecca has been nominated for the Nobel Prize, David said slowly, as if speaking the words might make them less true. Caroline's eyes widened. The Nobel Prize? In medicine? For research that could prevent Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's in millions of patients, I explained with the same matter-of-fact tone I had used to describe encouraging results just minutes earlier. My mother was crying now, tears of regret and realization flowing down her cheeks. Oh, Rebecca, we never understood. We never asked the right questions about your work. My father attempted to recover his composure. This is extraordinary news, Rebecca. We're incredibly proud of your achievement. The words rang hollow after years of dismissal, and we all knew it. I stood up from the breakfast table, my meal untouched, and addressed them with the dignity I had maintained throughout decades of being overlooked. Thank you, I said simply. I should go. The media attention Dr. Chen mentioned will require preparation, and I have interviews scheduled throughout the day. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me desperately. Rebecca, wait. I need to apologize. What I said about one child turning out right, I was completely wrong. Your work is... God, it's Nobel Prize level research. We were too blind to see what was right in front of us. I turned back to face them one final time. You were wrong about many things, I said quietly, but mostly, you were wrong about what constitutes valuable contribution to medicine. While you celebrated David's ability to fix problems after they occur, I was working to prevent them from happening at all. The parallel was devastating, and we all recognized it. David's surgical interventions, impressive as they were, helped individual patients. My research could prevent disease in millions of people worldwide. The hierarchy they had constructed around immediate versus long-term medical impact had been completely inverted. "Rebecca," my mother said through her tears, "how do we make this right? How do we repair what we've broken?" I paused at the door, considering her question. "You start by understanding that recognition doesn't create worth. My research was important 4 days ago, 4 months ago, 4 years ago. The Nobel nomination didn't change the value of my work. It only made it impossible for you to continue ignoring it." With that, I left them sitting at their breakfast table, surrounded by the wreckage of assumptions that had governed our family dynamic for my entire life. The daughter they had dismissed as academically inclined but practically irrelevant was about to become internationally celebrated for work that could change medicine forever. The weeks following the Nobel announcement transformed my life in ways I could never have anticipated. Media interviews became routine, as journalists from around the world sought to understand the research that could revolutionize treatment for neurodegenerative diseases. The laboratory that my father had dismissed as playing with test tubes became the subject of documentaries and feature articles in every major medical publication. Time magazine featured my work on their cover with the headline, "The Brain Saver: How One Woman's Research Could End Alzheimer's." The New York Times ran a 3-part series examining the implications of my research for millions of patients worldwide. Medical journals published editorial pieces analyzing the paradigm shift my work represented in approaching neurodegeneration. The professional recognition was gratifying, but the personal vindication was profound. Colleagues who had known me for years suddenly understood the scope of what I had been quietly achieving while working in relative obscurity. The research community had always respected my work, but now the broader medical establishment recognized its revolutionary potential. My parents' attempts at reconciliation began immediately after the Nobel announcement. Phone calls, flowers, dinner invitations, all the gestures they had never made when my achievements were invisible to mainstream recognition. The effort was genuine, but complicated by the years of dismissal that had preceded this moment of forced acknowledgement. David struggled most visibly with the reversal of our family dynamic. The brother who had always occupied the position of primary achievement suddenly found himself in the unprecedented role of secondary success. His surgical skills remained impressive, but they were now contextually diminished by my international recognition. During one particularly awkward family dinner 3 weeks after the announcement, David made an observation that cut to the heart of our changed relationship. "I never realized how different our work really is, Rebecca. I save lives one patient at a time. Your research could save millions of people who haven't even been born yet." The acknowledgement was generous and probably difficult for him to articulate. I appreciated his effort to understand the broader implications of our respective contributions to medicine. My mother's response was more emotional but equally genuine. She had spent hours researching my publications, trying to understand the work she had dismissed for years. "I read your paper in Nature Medicine," she told me during one of our carefully reconstructed conversations. "I didn't understand all the technical details, but I could see the potential impact. How did we miss something so important?" The question was rhetorical, but pointed to the fundamental issue that had governed our family relationships. They had valued immediate, visible results over long-term, fundamental research. Surgery provided dramatic intervention with clear outcomes, while research required patience for results that might take years to materialize. My father's adjustment was perhaps the most complex. His identity as the family patriarch had been built around his ability to recognize and nurture medical excellence. The Nobel nomination forced him to confront the reality that he had completely failed to identify exceptional achievement in his own daughter. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me during a phone call 6 weeks after the announcement, "about prevention versus intervention. I spent so many years focused on immediate results that I couldn't see the value in long-term research approaches." His acknowledgement was important, but it couldn't erase the years of dismissal that had shaped my understanding of my place in the family. The damage wasn't irreparable, but rebuilding our relationship would require sustained effort and genuine change in how they valued different types of medical contribution. The Nobel ceremony itself, held in Stockholm 6 months later, provided an unexpected opportunity for family healing. My parents attended, along with David and Caroline, and for the first time in my adult life, they witnessed me receiving recognition that they couldn't diminish or redirect toward my brother's achievements. As I delivered my Nobel lecture on preventing neurodegeneration, I looked out at the audience of international medical leaders and researchers, then found my family in the seats reserved for honorees' guests. My father was crying, not the tears of regret I had seen at our breakfast table, but tears of pride and recognition for work he finally understood. The reception following the ceremony brought together Nobel laureates from multiple disciplines, creating an atmosphere of intellectual celebration that my family had never experienced. Watching my parents navigate conversations about my research with other recipients and international medical leaders, I saw them truly grasp the significance of what I had achieved. Dr. Chen, who had made that transformative phone call months earlier, approached me during the reception. "Dr. Thompson, have you given thought to your next research direction? The committee would be very interested in supporting continued work in neurodegeneration prevention." Standing there in Stockholm, surrounded by the highest level of medical recognition, I realized that the Nobel Prize had accomplished something beyond professional validation. It had forced my family to confront their limited understanding of valuable medical contribution and created space for rebuilding our relationships on more authentic foundations. The years of being overlooked had shaped me in ways that served me well as a researcher. Working without recognition had developed resilience and internal motivation that sustained me through the lengthy processes required for fundamental medical research. In a strange way, my family's dismissal had freed me to pursue work that mattered deeply to me without seeking their approval. Today, our family dynamic operates on different principles. My parents ask detailed questions about my research and seem genuinely interested in understanding its implications. David and I have developed a mutual respect for our different approaches to medical impact. The hierarchy that once governed our relationships has been replaced by recognition that medicine requires diverse contributions. The Nobel nomination taught me that vindication isn't about proving others wrong. It's about staying true to work that matters regardless of external recognition. My research was important before the Nobel Committee acknowledged it, and their recognition simply made it impossible for others to continue overlooking its value. If you've ever been dismissed by people whose opinions seem to define your worth, remember that their assessment reflects their limitations, not your potential. Sometimes the greatest satisfaction comes not from their eventual recognition, but from discovering you never needed their approval to achieve something extraordinary. The daughter they considered academically inclined but practically irrelevant had prevented neurodegeneration in millions of patients worldwide. That reality existed independent of their ability to see it, just as your worth exists independent of others' capacity to recognize it. Share your own stories of being underestimated in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if this journey of family vindication resonated with you. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you never could be, and discovering that their opinion never mattered as much as you thought it did.